This is a Cessna 172, an aircraft that I haven't flown in 25 years. And even though I used to fly fighter jets and now I fly for a major commercial airline, I'm going to try and learn how to fly a Cessna again. Because my goal is to travel halfway across the country to fly the exact same Cessna 172 that I did my very first solo flight in 25 years ago. And the truth is, this was going to be a lot harder than I expected, and it was definitely going to cost me a lot of money, so thank you Avemco for your support. Now let's get started. I'm Hoover, and welcome to Hoover's Hangar. In order to accomplish my mission, I needed to find the Cessna that I did my very first solo in. Then I had to find a good flight instructor that I could trust, and the plan was to knock out at least 3 training flights and then finally do my solo flight. I know it sounds simple and you might not think there's a lot to it, but to be honest, this is much more than just another flight in a Cessna 172. It's about reconnecting with my love for aviation and how my whole journey started before the airlines and before the fighter jets. And if I'm going to do this the right way, I needed to be as safe as possible, and I had a lot of work to do along the way, and it all starts with a walk around. By the way, this is Michael, my flight instructor who's going to be helping me on this journey, but more about him later. For right now, I already know what you're thinking. That's a nice looking panel on that Cessna 172. And you're right, it is. And it's definitely not what I had when I did my first solo 25 years ago. Unfortunately, I don't have any photos from back then. And if you ask my kids why, they'd tell you it's because cameras weren't invented yet. But the truth is that most of you remember a time when we didn't have GoPros or cell phones to document everything we did in an airplane, and the only place we kept those memories was in a paper logbook. In fact, here's my original logbook from 25 years ago, and you can see that I did my first solo on June 13th, 2000 in November 6601 Kilo. We took off from the Davis Airfield at the United States Air Force Academy, and after we landed at A50, which is the Colorado Springs East Airfield, I still remember my instructor hopping out of the plane and wishing me the best. It was a short flight, just a few laps around the pattern, but it was an amazing feeling that I'm never going to forget. And what's really neat about that experience is that almost every pilot that I've spoken to remembers their very first solo. And when I was thinking about getting back into GA flying again, I thought, how cool would it be to go fly one of these Cessnas again? So imagine my surprise when I found out that November 6601 Kilo was still owned and being operated out of the flight club at the Air Force Academy. Now, I wish I had some photos from my first solo flight, and if you're a student pilot or thinking about becoming a pilot, my advice is to take a lot more photos than I did because you're going to wish you had them 25 years from now. Regardless, I imagine the interior probably looked something like this at the time, a standard 6-pack with steam gauges without a bunch of advanced avionics or Garmin displays, and a paper checklist that probably hasn't changed very much over the years. And the truth is that I was kind of hoping to get checked out in a Cessna like this because sometimes all the avionics and the technology can be too much when all you want to do is a simple VFR flight. However, considering that the Cessna I did my first solo in has had some upgrades over the years, and this is what it looks like now, and also considering that all I've known for the past 25 years is heads-up displays, glass cockpits, and lots of automation, it was probably a better choice and almost second nature to be in a Cessna with a setup like this, and it's something I was very comfortable with. That being said, it's important to remember how this journey first started. I don't know when you first thought about being a pilot or flying, but I grew up in Central Florida, and when I was a kid, I wanted to be an astronaut. If you remember the 1980s, space shuttle launches were a big deal back then, and what was really cool was we could see them from across the state where we lived. Tragically, one of my core memories from childhood was when our entire elementary school gathered outside on January 28, 1986. If that date sounds familiar, that's because it was the day the Space Shuttle Challenger broke apart in flight moments after liftoff, and we saw it happen in real time. I didn't really understand the significance of it at that time, but it didn't stop me from thinking that one day I might be an astronaut. The only problem was life was going to get in the way.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Now ready for the start, so you can grab the checklist, and we'll start on the left-hand side there.
As I grew older, my parents ran into some financial problems. They had to declare bankruptcy, and they fought a lot, and for a period of time, my dad didn't seem to be around very much. I still remember when I was starting junior high and we had to move in with my grandma, where I shared a bedroom with my 3 younger siblings. I really hated the situation we were in, and this was probably the lowest point in my life.
Clear prop.
Thankfully, my mom was always there for us, and I didn't like it, but she forced us to go to church every Sunday. And eventually, she made me go to a summer youth retreat with the church, and that's where I gave my life to Christ, and things finally started to turn around. My mom was really amazing, but unfortunately, this was one time that she let me down. I blame her for this glamour shot, and it's also her fault for letting me get a perm when I was 10 years old because I wanted to look like Kirk Cameron, but thankfully those photos don't exist anymore. Regardless, I now had a positive outlook on life, but unfortunately, no one in my family had ever gone to college, and because money was tight, I wasn't sure what I was going to do with my life. My childhood dream of becoming an astronaut was almost a distant memory by this point. As I was getting ready for my senior year of high school, I was in the guidance counselor's office to talk about my future, and that's when I saw a brochure for West Point, the United States Military Academy, and I realized that I could actually go to college for free and the military would even pay me to do it. To be perfectly clear, this had nothing to do with me wanting to be an astronaut or wanting to fly. At this point, I was just trying to find the easiest way to go to college and move away from home. That's why I applied to West Point, the Naval Academy, the Air Force Academy, and I think I even applied to the Merchant Marine Academy. No offense, but I was getting desperate. Thankfully, everyone but the Air Force Academy rejected me, so the next thing I knew, I was headed out to Colorado. The reason why I'm sharing all of this is because sometimes people are like, oh, you went to the academy because you always dreamed of being a pilot. And with me, that wasn't really the case.
You ready to taxi then?
Yeah, we'll go to runway 23. That's what the jets were taking off of, and that's what the windsock looks like it's favoring.
Alright, Monroe Skyhawk 2746 Lima, taxi from Hangar 9, runway 23, Monroe.
As we taxied out, I have to admit that this probably wasn't the best day to go flying for my very first lesson back in a Cessna 172. That's because we had a 15-knot direct crosswind. Technically, that's the manufacturer's maximum demonstrated crosswind component, but we had a good conversation about the risk and went over the crosswind procedures before we even started the engine. And the most important thing is that we both felt comfortable doing the flight. We pulled into the run-up area, and as we were doing all of our before takeoff checks, I couldn't help but think about some of the mishaps that I've talked about on my other YouTube channel, where pilots get complacent and they don't use a checklist, or they rush through things, and if I'm doing a debrief on it, then it usually doesn't end well for them. That's why it's so important to follow the checklist and take as much time as you need.
Mixture set for best power, carb heat is off, pitot heat.
We're not going to need it.
Okay, as required.
There's another switch, it's right there.
This is first time in 25 years I didn't have to turn on the pitot heat.
Really? Well, we're not going in any clouds.
Yeah,
so
maybe it's like, because, I'm so used to it.
We got an update on the winds and verified that by looking at the windsock, and then we taxied to the hold short, and now it was time to brief contingencies before I try to take off in a Cessna for the first time in 25 years.
Abort plane today. Anything happens below rotation speed, we're going to stop, get off the runway if we can, exit the runway out the back of the airplane. Anything beyond rotation, and we're below 1,000 feet AGL, we're going to immediately pitch for glide, land on whatever's in front of us. If it's more runway that we got, if it's another field, 30 degrees left or right of our nose, above 1,000 feet, we'll assess the situation. If we're in the pattern here, left down or something like that, we'll just glide it back into the runway. But if we're out in the practice area above 1,000 feet, we will run the necessary checks, pitch for glide, get to the best landing site. Any questions?
No questions.
All right. That's good for me.
Ready. Under traffic, Skyhawk 2746 Lima, taking off runway 23, Monroe. Now still clear.
Yeah, runway's clear.
I was a little bit nervous as we pulled onto the runway, but I was mostly excited to have the chance to do this, and the purpose of the flight was to head out to the practice area to do some steep turns and stalls, and just get a feel for flying the aircraft again.
Yeah, ailerons into the wind. Yeah. Alright, all the way in. Engine instruments in the green, airspeed's alive. We're past rotation speed. Let's rotate. Nice and gentle pullback here. And there we go. We're good. You can bring us coordinated now and just let us climb out. Let the airplane weather vane into the wind.
Roger.
If you remember from earlier, one of my goals was to find a good flight instructor. I wanted someone that really loved to teach and that I could also trust to challenge me and make sure I was 100% ready to solo before they signed me off. And Michael was definitely the man for the job. Even though he's only 20 years old, he has about 700 hours in a Cessna 172, and I could tell from the first time we met and from the walk around that he was a great instructor.
All right, good job with the takeoff. Like you never left GA.
Yeah. It could have been better. Always room for improvement.
Oh yeah. That doesn't mean it wasn't good though.
Even though Michael was a great instructor, one of my concerns was making sure that he didn't assume that I knew what I was doing and that he felt comfortable pointing out my mistakes. That's why one of the first things I told him was that even though I've been flying for 25 years, I have almost zero general aviation time, and he shouldn't assume that I know what I'm doing. He's the expert in the Cessna, and I trusted him to keep me safe.
Thanks.
Yeah.
So we can go ahead and start setting up for maneuvers now.
Okay.
We'll go ahead and do our pre-maneuver checklist. So I usually use the acronym CRACK. So clearing turns, reference point, altitude, and then configuration. So we'll do our clearing turns first to the left, about roughly 90 degrees, looking outside, high, low, same altitude for any sort of obstruction, any other airplanes, any birds, any drones. Then we're also looking for any good landing site. Plenty of fields down here below us, so we'd have to choose from should an emergency arise.
Okay, back to my story. Once I got to the Air Force Academy in Colorado, I was excited because I started remembering my dream of becoming an astronaut, and I figured that nothing was going to stop me from becoming an astronaut now, except math. That's what killed my dream. It was math. Speaking of dreams, when Michael was flying the aircraft for a minute, I decided it would be a great time to ask him this question.
What's the dream aircraft you could fly? You could pick anything.
It goes back and forth. I love flying tailwheel airplanes. I want to do aerobatics and stuff like that one day. So I'd love to get in an old Warbird, like a Corsair or a Spitfire or Mustang or something like that. But I think it would be really cool to go fly an F-18. Because how many other people can say that they've flown an F-18? And just super capable airplanes.
Yeah.
So.
At this point, I wasn't sure if he knew that I'd flown the F-18 before. Regardless, every pilot has a dream aircraft they want to fly, and when I started my freshman year at the Academy, I didn't realize how quickly any dreams I had of being an astronaut would soon come to an end. Remember how I said math killed my dreams? Well, you see, I thought I was pretty good at math in high school, but when I started doing college-level calculus and taking engineering classes, I was absolutely crushed. Halfway through my first semester, I had a 1.4 GPA, and I realized two things. First of all, I wasn't going to get a degree in math or engineering. That was going to be too hard, and I didn't want to be an astronaut that bad. Yeah, I know, I'm a quitter. Second, I needed to find the easiest way to graduate, and because I'm stubborn and I like to argue with people to prove that I'm right, I decided to get a degree in legal studies. That's like the Air Force Academy's version of a pre-law degree, and I thought that maybe I could be a lawyer one day, and to be honest, I kind of stopped thinking about flying for a while.
So we're just going to go basically pull power back, start slowing down, and we get around 55 or 60 knots, go ahead and put the power back in.
Yep, anytime we're going below about 2,000 RPM, we will pull carb heat on.
Okay.
Just to make sure that we don't develop any sort of carburetor icing. And now we're just going to trade our airspeed for altitude, so just keep pitching back to keep us at 3,600 feet.
Yep. Right about here, go full power?
Yeah, go for it. Full power, bring that carb heat in, and as we go up, we will compensate with right rudder for all of the left-hand turning tendencies. And just like that, we don't need to get the nose up super high.
Okay.
Just let the airspeed bleed off. There we go. Stall warning horn, we push down, left rudder. Yep, nose comes down. We can start picking that nose back up again. Right rudder. We're starting to go back up, and then we pitch right about there roughly for our climb.
We ended up doing a few more stalls, and this was really important because flying a Cessna is nothing like the F-15E or the F-18, and I wanted to get a good feel for the stall characteristics of the aircraft and all the warning signs. Anyways, as I was saying, when I got closer to graduating from the Academy, I found out that the Air Force doesn't really pay for people to go to law school, so that killed my plan to become a lawyer, and then I had a tough decision to make. You see, when you graduate from the academy, you automatically have a 5-year service commitment, but if you went to pilot training, then it was an 8-year commitment. However, starting with my graduating class, they were increasing that to 10 years. I don't know about you, but I don't know that many 21-year-olds that are ready to make a 10-year commitment, and I wasn't sure if I really wanted to be a pilot for the next 10 years. Either way, all of my friends were going to be pilots, and I figured I'd give it a shot, but thanks to my incredible 2.51 GPA, I got to pick a class start date that was 1 year after graduating. The good news was that it gave me a year to figure out if I really wanted to be a pilot, especially since I didn't have a degree to become an astronaut. By the way, one of the coolest things I got to do while I was at the academy was during one of the summer programs when we spent time with an F-15C squadron down in Florida, and I got a chance to fly in the back seat of an F-15C, having no clue I'd end up flying the F-15E just a few years later.
What's your favorite thing about flying a 172?
Just the memories. Like, almost everybody has flown a 172. Every pilot's been there, so you can talk to anybody about it.
Yeah.
And then just flying it by myself solo, those memories of getting my private in them and everything like that. So,
Have you kept track of how many students you've soloed?
how many students I've soloed from 0 would be 3.
Okay.
I've inherited a lot of students, so I've gotten about 5 people their licenses so far.
Okay.
And so I've gotten 5 people their licenses, but I've only had about 3 that I've sent all the way through from 0 to hero.
What's been your scariest moment?
I've had a student put me into a spin. We were doing a power on stall.
Okay.
And we were practicing, making sure that we were recovering with rudders and not ailerons. Of course, he went for the rudder or the ailerons, excuse me.
Yeah.
And we got into the incipient phase of the spin. So it wasn't fully developed and it wasn't anything crazy, but it was enough for him to realize, oh, if I don't use rudders, I'm going to do this to myself.
Yeah.
So it was definitely an eye-opening experience for him, but it definitely made me sit up and really grab the controls.
And that was here at Monroe?
Yep, that was here at Monroe. It was last summer.
Okay.
Fortunately, I haven't had anybody almost scare me, in a little while, so I might be due for one. We'll see.
It was great listening to Mike share what he loved about flying the Cessna, and it made me think about all the flying experiences that I've had over the years and the lessons I've learned along the way. By the way, this is my mom and dad at my commissioning ceremony from the Air Force Academy, and here's a picture of me at graduation about to start my aviation journey. As soon as I graduated, the Air Force put me through a program to get my private pilot certificate because they wanted cadets to have more exposure to aviation before they showed up at pilot training. That's how I started flying Cessna 172s out of the Air Force Academy 25 years ago. The program paid for 50 hours of flight time, and that's exactly what I got, with 13.8 of those hours being pilot and command time flying solo, and I walked away with my private pilot certificate. Now here I was learning to fly a Cessna again and about to land one for the first time in 25 years, and we had a good 15-knot direct crosswind to deal with, so we decided we would make this one a full stop. But when I look back on my journey, I didn't realize the incredible opportunities that I would have, but also some of the struggles. For now, I'll let you be the judge of this landing, and after the landing, I'll explain how I almost became a helicopter pilot.
A little high.
Okay, all right. We're looking for 1,000-foot markers over there, so those big white bars.
Yep.
Power back to about 17 or so. There we go. We're going to pitch to maintain altitude.
Okay.
Let that airspeed bleed off. We're going to get below our white arc. All right. There we go. We can get in 1-notch flaps. 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000. There we go. I'll just let that nose come down right about 75 or so.
Okay.
Yep, make sure we're keeping that power up about 15, 16 or so. And we'll go ahead and turn base here so we don't keep getting pushed away.
Monroe traffic, Skyhawk 2746 Lima, base runway 23, Monroe.
Alright. Yep, and our crosswind correction is right aileron, left rudder for today, just because we have a wind coming from the right. So when we get lined up there on final, we'll kind of get that in a little bit earlier on.
Okay.
So that way we're not trying to do it as we're in the round out in the flare.
500.
Alright, cool. We're good. Traffic on final is clear. Traffic on the runway, clear. Alright, we'll start
500.
down just a little bit. We'll aim for about 70 today since we do have the gusts.
Okay. Monroe traffic, Skyhawk 2746 Lima, turn final for runway 23, Monroe.
Yep. Alright, so we'll just kind of wait on that turn a little bit, back a little bit of power off. Yep, we're kind of gonna line up, wait a little bit more just because we have so much.
There's three white, one red.
Yeah, left aileron, or left rudder, right aileron. See how much we're able to crab here?
Yeah.
Power comes to idle. And then right here, we're just gonna nice and easily keep flying the airplane there. Yep, bring that nose up a little bit. A little bit. Whoop. Okay. Yeah, just like that, we'll ride on that right main. Left main comes down, ailerons into the wind. All right.
All right.
And then we can get on the brakes slightly and make Alpha 3.
Yep.
Okay, I got nervous because we ballooned a little bit and I thought we were going to slam into the runway, but it ended up being not too bad. And even though this first flight was over, I still needed to do a few more rides to knock out some patterns and finish up my training. Anyways, back to my story about how I almost became a helicopter pilot. While I was waiting to go to pilot training, I was assigned to a C9 squadron at Ramstein, Germany, where I was an executive assistant. But the cool part was that I got to fly with them once or twice a month.
Clear prop. Strong. The beacon is. We'll start.
The C9 was responsible for air medical evacuations and patient transport. Basically, it was a flying ambulance, and I got to see a lot of Europe on those trips. But to be honest, it felt like flying with a commercial airline, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to do that kind of flying in the future. The most important thing that happened during that assignment was the squadron conducted air medical evacuations to help the victims of the USS Cole bombing in October of 2000. Even though I didn't get to go on any of those flights, it was great seeing the squadron in action, doing the mission, and helping save lives, and that was very inspiring. After a year in Germany, I headed off to pilot training at Laughlin Air Force Base in Del Rio, Texas. My class had just finished up ground school, and we were getting ready to start flying the T-37 when 9/11 happened. I'll never forget being in the flight room and watching everything unfold on the TV. Flying was canceled for the day, but 2 days later I had my very first flight in the T-37. The mood had changed, and there was a much greater sense of purpose behind the training that we were doing. Now here I was almost 25 years later with a new purpose and a new mission, and we were about to take off on our second flight.
Monroe traffic, Skyhawk 2746 Lima, taking the active for takeoff runway 23, departing to the southeast, Monroe.
I was really enjoying flying the T-37, and initially I wanted to fly fighter jets after I graduated pilot training because that seemed to be a lot more exciting and challenging. However, 2 of my T-37 instructors happened to be prior MH-53 pilots, and they played a large role in influencing my decision. If you're not familiar with the MH-53 aircraft, it was called the Pavlo, and it was a long-range special operations and combat search and rescue helicopter flown by the Air Force at that time. These guys were awesome, and I loved hearing all their stories about working with the special operations teams, and even though most people put helicopters as their last choice at pilot training, it soon became number 1 on my list. That's right, I wanted to fly Helos, and I still think it would be really cool to get a flight in one someday on this channel, so if you know anyone, just let me know.
See, this is the other thing I've got to get used to is using the trim. I haven't touched a trim wheel in 25 years. But it makes flying so much easier when you get everything trimmed out, you know?
Yeah.
And the Strike Eagle, we got trim, but basically as soon as you take off and you go gear up, you do a couple clicks forward and nose down trim, and then you won't touch it again the entire flight, even through landing. You don't need to.
Yeah. This airplane, you'll have to trim it, not too much, but a good bit.
Dude, this is awesome. Forget how much fun it is to get out and actually go flying like on a nice day like this.
Yeah.
You know, we got like a high overcast, but I mean, it's still a great day to go flying. The winds are nice.
Speaking of having fun, nothing beats the first time you get to solo an aircraft, and this is a photo I took during my first solo flight in the T-37, and this is me getting thrown in the solo pool after that flight, a tradition that I hope they still continue today. Despite all the fun I was having, I had no idea my entire world was about to be turned upside down. When I was a few weeks away from finishing training in the T-37, something bad happened. We were coming back from the airspace, and as we started to descend, I developed probably the worst sinus block you could possibly have. The kind where it feels like someone is shoving an ice pick in your eyeball. You see, the problem is the T-37 isn't pressurized. And even though you're wearing an oxygen mask, the constant altitude changes, especially when you're doing spins and aerobatics, they had wreaked havoc on my sinuses. I suffered through it, and eventually we landed, and that's when the flight doc at the base told me that I would never fly again because I had chronic sinusitis. Just like that, my journey to become a pilot was over. Or so I thought. Luckily, they sent me to the Air Force Medical Center in San Antonio to get another opinion, and that's when I was told that I was fine and just needed to take some antibiotics and Flonase for seasonal allergies. And if you're not familiar, this is pretty typical for the military. I had to take several weeks off from flying, and that meant I wouldn't get to track select with my class. That's the point about halfway through pilot training after T-37s, where you picked the track that you wanted. Your choices were T-38s for fighters or bombers, T-1s for transport or heavy aircraft, UH-1s for helos, or you could pick the C-130. I was the only one that wanted to fly helicopters, so if it hadn't been for my sinus block, I probably would have gotten my first pick.
You still remember your first solo?
Oh yeah. Yep, October 11th, 2023.
How bad was it?
It actually wasn't that bad. The first landing and the third landing were pretty good. The second one, I got a little overconfident.
I was gonna say, did you get the first and third landing on the same pass?
Yeah. No, not at the same time.
I did. I think I got 3 landings on my first pass.
No. My first pass was definitely 1 landing. But yeah, it was after the second landing when I went and parked it after I did my 3 and everything like that. My instructor said congratulations, and then I saw him walk up and check the tips of the propellers to make sure I didn't prop strike.
It's funny how when I had that sinus block, I thought my career was over, and then a few days later it wasn't. I ended up getting medically rolled back to the next class, and now I was competing against someone else that desperately wanted to fly helos. During that delay, I had a chance to talk to all of my friends from my class that were now ahead of me, specifically the guys that were flying T-38s, and they convinced me to go ahead and put down T-38s for the fighter track as my first choice. And to be honest, flying fighter jets was probably always something that I wanted in the back of my mind. I just needed a little reassurance. Now, before you say anything, just keep in mind that all of the T-37 instructor pilots that I had were helo pilots or heavy transport pilots. There weren't any former fighter pilots instructing in the T-37, so I didn't really have a positive influence trying to persuade me to fly fighters like I did with the helo guys, convincing me that helos were the way to go. By the way, at this point in the flight, we had finished all of our area work and I was starting to feel more comfortable in the aircraft, and now we were headed back to the pattern to practice some landings.
So, have you ever used the finer points? Are you familiar with that?
I know about it. I haven't used it a whole lot.
So, I would highly recommend it. It's free for flight instructors.
Cool.
But I used it to kind of warm up a little bit and review all the Cessna procedures. My buddy Jason Miller runs it. So it's like an app, and they've got all kinds of private pilot, instrument training, all that stuff on there with videos. I was actually brushing up on all that for all of this. I want to make the most efficient use of my time and prepare myself. And so I was learning, some of the visual references, like halfway up the strut for the runway for your spacing on the downwind. So it was a really good refresher.
The Finer Points didn't sponsor this video, but I want people to stay safe, and I think it's a great resource. And if you sign up, I make a small commission, and that helps support the channel because flying airplanes isn't cheap. Now, when it comes to my story, I ended up getting my first pick to fly the T-38, and the other guy that wanted to fly helos got his chance to do so, and everyone was happy. I spent the next several months completing my training, and when you get near the end, they have assignment night. That's when you find out what plane you're going to fly after you graduate from pilot training. It's a huge deal, and there are plenty of TikTok videos about it now, but back in 2002, we just had low-quality digital cameras, and this was me finding out that I got my first choice and I was going to go fly the F-15E Strike Eagle at Seymour Johnson Air Force Base in North Carolina. I can't tell you how excited I was, and my mom and dad both came out to my pilot training graduation.
I got to take my kids flying. That's the next thing. So my kids have never flown with me. My wife has never flown with me behind the controls. And all these years that we've been married, it's just never happened. So this is awesome. I'm really looking forward to getting checked out in this again, and now I can take them up for some flights.
Yep. So we have him turning.
You got us in sight.
As I was finishing this second flight, because we spent so much time in the airspace, we didn't have time to do a bunch of patterns, and that was the one thing that I was probably the most nervous about. You see, I've gotten so used to landing at much faster airspeeds that it was almost a little uncomfortable to go so slow. But also, it's weird to hear the stall warning horn when you're trying to land. Regardless, this was something that was going to need more practice on the next flight. So for the flaps, I know we got the flaps up right now. When would I use flaps for takeoff?
Generally on a soft field landing, you use them. They just help you get off the ground a little bit quicker. So if you are on a soft field or on an improved surface, you want to get off the ground as quick as you can so that way you can accelerate.
Yeah, but normal takeoff is going to be no flap.
Yeah.
Okay.
Most of the operations that we're going to do are going to be no flap.
I eventually got to Seymour Johnson in January of 2003 to begin a 9-month course to learn how to fly the F-15E. This is me looking over the forms with my instructor just before my very first flight in the Strike Eagle, and that flight was an incredible experience that I'll never forget. One of the unique things about this training is that you do a few flights with an instructor pilot in your back seat, and then once you pass your instrument check ride, you'll pretty much never have an instructor pilot in your back seat again. Instead, you're paired with a Wizzo throughout training, so you learn to operate as a crew from day one. As a side note, I obviously never got the chance to become an astronaut, but this guy did, and he went through F-15E training with me, and he would go on to command the SpaceX Crew 3 mission in 2021, and I'm super proud of him, and that's about as close as I got to becoming an astronaut. Anyways, after graduating from training, I was assigned to the 336 world-famous Rocketeers at Seymour Johnson for my first operational assignment, and everyone always asks me, how did you get the call sign Hoover?
Monroe traffic, Skyhawk 2746 Lima, taking runway 5 for departure, staying in the pattern, Monroe.
Well, the truth is that when I showed up in the Rockets, I had to go get a fit check to make sure my harness and G-suit still fit. The only problem was somehow my gear had gotten swapped with someone else who was much larger than me, so nothing fit. And the guy working on my gear made the joke that they might have to get a women's G-suit since they might not have a men's size that was small enough. Look, I was a skinny guy back then. However, the truth is that there's no such thing as a woman's G-suit. And the most important thing you need to know about a fighter squadron is that as long as 10% of the story is true, then the whole story can be true.
Yeah, shift those feet to the bottom of the pedals. Heels to the floor.
So someone who overheard all of this decided to go around telling people in the squadron that there was this new guy that just showed up that likes to wear women's flight suits and flight gear because it's more form-fitting.
There we go, RPM set, engine instruments are in the green.
Pretty soon, a lot of people believe the story, and I get the occasional weird look as I walk down the hall, or someone might ask me if I really wore women's flight suits. Eventually, when it came time to get a call sign, I hadn't screwed anything up that they could make fun of me and use for my call sign, but they had this great story about a closet cross-dresser, and it turns out that J. Edgar Hoover was a closet cross-dresser, so that's where Hoover comes from. I ended up doing a few combat deployments with the Rockets, but the best part about that assignment was that I was fortunate enough to meet the love of my life, and of course I had to propose in Las Vegas at the Hoover Dam, and we got married and she became Mrs. Hoover. After that first assignment, I was selected to participate in an exchange program with the Marine Corps flying the F-18D Hornet, and we traveled across the country to Miramar and San Diego to complete 1 year of training flying the F-18. That was an awesome experience, and I even got carrier qualified, but here's the thing. The Air Force would never do flight training the way the Navy and Marines do it. Typically, Navy and Marine pilots get exposure to the carrier when they do their training in the T-45, but I never did that. So my first experience with a real aircraft carrier was walking onto the boat when it was in port, and then the next day we were out at sea, and I was told to go find your jet because it's your turn in the pattern. Speaking of patterns, today was the first time I had a chance to do some pattern work, but because of bad weather and my work schedule, it had been a month since my last flight, so I was definitely a little rusty.
Yeah, so whenever you're ready, we can
Monroe traffic, Skyhawk 2746 Lima, base runway 5, Monroe.
Yeah, so no more than about 30 degrees. And be careful when we turn base, don't let the nose dip too much.
Okay.
We don't need to dive. The airplane will just come down. We're draggy and slow. I don't see anybody out there on final.
And then we go flaps full here.
Let's go with flaps 20.
Okay.
2, 3, there's 20. I prefer to land with flaps 20. A lot of people like 30 degrees, so we can feel it out, figure out which one you're comfortable with.
Monroe traffic, Skyhawk 2746 Lima, final runway 5, touch and go, Monroe.
Okay, as I was saying, my biggest concern about the aircraft carrier was trying not to get hit by an F-18 while I was walking across an operational carrier deck for the very first time. Either way, I remember stepping out onto the deck and how crazy it was with the F-18s landing and taking off right in front of me, and somehow I made it to my jet and got started up and then taxied over to the catapult. Next thing I know, I was thrown back in my seat as I was launched from 0 to 165 miles per hour in less than 2 seconds. The aircraft jumped off the deck, I turned downwind, then base, and I was on final and landing just a few minutes later, catching the wire and coming to a stop in just a few hundred feet, and then it was time to fold the wings and taxi to the catapult and do it all over again. If I remember correctly, I had to do 10 day traps and 6 night traps to qualify, and the day traps were a ton of fun and pretty easy to do. The night traps were, well, let's just say a little bit more challenging. And we were doing those in calm seas. And even with all the lights on the deck, it still felt like you were landing in a black hole. And it's definitely an experience that most Air Force pilots will never get. I would go on to spend the next few years flying the F-18D in South Carolina with VMFA AW533 the Hawks. Now I like to joke with people that this was my Air Force appreciation tour, but it was probably one of the best assignments that I had in the military in terms of the flying that I got to do and learning about leadership from the Marines, and I really enjoyed that assignment.
That's good on the airspeed. I usually aim for about the second stripe where those aiming point markers are.
What are you to come?
Yeah, there we go. That looks good.
It's Marine Unicom, go ahead.
Work some power
Hey,
back.
filter back
We can
open.
go idle. Yep, let's go all the way to idle.
Affirmative, yes it is.
Thank you.
Motor traffic, Cherokee 4569 X-ray. Thank you, runway 5 for departure. We're heading to the northeast. Motor traffic.
There you go. Flaps up, carpet in, on the go.
After South Carolina, I ended up doing another tour flying the Strike Eagle for 3 years at Mountain Home Air Force Base in Idaho. And even though my 10-year commitment from pilot training was finally coming to an end, I just wanted to keep flying fighter jets. So I decided to stick around as long as I could.
Monroe traffic, Skyhawk 2746 Lima, downwind, runway 5, Monroe.
Alright, so good job with that landing. It was nice and smooth. Only thing, these airplanes, we just got to be as smooth as possible with them.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can't really jerk them around too much. We're not really flying anything super big.
Yeah.
There's not a whole lot of weight that we have to move around. Max gross is 2,300 pounds, so very, very light compared to what you're used to flying.
The Air Force sent me off to school for my next assignment, and then I spent 3 years doing a staff job in Texas and was looking forward to getting back in the cockpit.
Let's try coming in just a little bit slower than 70 this time.
I'm still getting used to flying slow, man.
Yeah, it's weird, isn't it?
You know, you have such a slow stall speed, but, you know, it's just...
It doesn't feel right,
Yeah,
does it?
yeah.
All right, so at this point, I've been out of the cockpit for 4 years, and I was really hoping to get back to the Strike Eagle, but unfortunately, that's when the Air Force said that I was overdue for a remote assignment. That's when you go somewhere for a year without your family, and I was absolutely livid about this. The Air Force was hurting for fighter pilots, and retention was suffering, yet in all of their wisdom, they wanted to keep me out of the jet for 1 more year. The biggest problem I had with that is it would result in me being out of the cockpit for more than 5 years, and that meant I wouldn't be eligible to return to the Strike Eagle and would likely end up for my final Air Force assignment as an instructor at a pilot training base. That's when I made a very important decision, and I told the Air Force that if I'm not going to have a chance to come back to the Strike Eagle, then I want to convert my remote assignment into a 2-year accompanied tour so that way I can take my family with me. Thankfully, they agreed, and my wife and 3 kids and I packed our bags for South Korea.
Had a touch of power there to catch the descent. Yeah, we gotta, keep that nose down. Yep, just focusing on our spot. Keep that nose down, there we go. Working that power back to idle. Round it out. There we go, hold it. Keep adding a little bit of back pressure. There we go, just need a little bit of crosswind correction in there. Came in at the last second. So just a little more left rudder, right aileron.
Yeah.
Bring that nose around, upwind wheel.
By the way, we spent an hour in the pattern and got plenty of landings. My trip to Colorado was less than 2 weeks away, and there was still one thing that I needed to do that Michael couldn't help me with, and I'll explain more about that later. For right now, my family and I were headed off to Korea, and I still had one more flight to do. It was finally time for my last flight before I could head out to Colorado to do my solo. I had completed 2 of my mission objectives, and all of the hard work was about to pay off. We were going to warm up with a few patterns, then head out to the area to practice emergency procedures and finish up with a good landing. However, we still haven't gotten to the most important part of my story and my journey.
Monroe traffic, Skyhawk 2746 Lima, taxi runway 23 from Hangar 9. Launching the fleet.
Yeah, we're all going out at the same time.
After my family and I got settled into Korea, I received an email from the base commander at Seymour Johnson basically saying, hey, it looks like you're going to be out of the jet for more than 5 years. Do you want to come back to fly the F-15E? Seriously, you can't make this stuff up. He said he could offer me a position as a DO for a fighter squadron, and I said yes. So they worked out some waivers, and they cut my assignment to Korea short, and my family and I moved back to North Carolina.
Monroe traffic, Skyhawk 2746 Lima, taking runway 23, departing, and we'll stay in the pattern, Monroe.
Tragically, here's where things started to go downhill. And that's because when we were moving back, we learned that my mom had been recently diagnosed with leukemia. Now, I honestly believe that God was at work here because moving back to North Carolina meant that I could easily travel and see my mom as she went through her chemo treatments. A few months later, I had finished getting checked out in the Strike Eagle again, but my mom had taken a turn for the worse. I remember taking a trip down to Florida to see her shortly before her death, and then I made the mistake of rushing to drive back to North Carolina to do a training flight in my new squadron. Although I was well rested, my mind wasn't in the right place and I wasn't prepared for the briefing. The operations group commander was leading the formation that day, and he almost canceled the flight because of how unprepared I was. Unfortunately, my guess was that flight was probably his one chance to see if I was really DO material, and things obviously didn't go well. Tragically, shortly after that, my mom would end up passing in December of 2017, but I was grateful for the time that I got to spend with her during her final days. Behind the scenes, my name came off the list to be a DO, and the base commander swapped out, and the new commander offered me a job as the wing chief of safety. It definitely wasn't my first choice, but once I got into the job, I discovered how much I enjoyed it and how much it turned out to be a huge blessing for me. The job was a lot less stressful than being a DO, and it gave me more time with my family. And the reality is that without that job, I probably wouldn't have ended up making YouTube videos about aviation mishaps. That assignment at Seymour Johnson would be my last in the Air Force. And something that I haven't told you yet that's really important to understand is that several years prior to this, my dad became a Christian and we reconciled, and we have a great relationship to this day. He actually came out to my retirement ceremony and got to see me fly for the last time in the Strike Eagle. And even though my mom wasn't with us, I knew that she would be proud of all that I'd accomplished over the years.
Stay a little bit low. Yeah, he's probably staying low for you. Yeah, he's staying low for you.
My Air Force retirement ceremony was in December of 2019, and I wanted to keep flying, so I ended up interviewing and was hired by a major airline with a class start date of April 6, 2020. I had no idea that COVID was about to change all of that. 2 weeks before I started training, I got an email essentially saying, "Don't bother showing up, and we'll call you if things change." This was when life really sucked, and I know there's a lot of people that had a much tougher time than I did, but I'm just being honest about how I felt at the time. I was out of the military and I didn't have a job and I had no idea what I was going to do. I had recently gotten a real estate license to try and make some money on the side as a hobby for when I became an airline pilot, but that was now my full-time job. The only problem was you weren't allowed to meet with people unless you were already under contract for a house, so I started making YouTube videos to try and get some business. And just like most people that try YouTube, I had no idea what I was doing. My videos weren't really getting any views and it was a difficult process. I eventually got better at it, but it was a ton of work. After about 6 months of struggling, I landed a job with a Part 135 private charter company flying a Citation 560 XL. I ended up doing that job for about 9 months while I was waiting for the airlines to call me back, and I kept making real estate videos and got really good at making short form content, something that would come in handy later on. Eventually the airlines called and I was hired in June of 2021. I kept making real estate videos, but I hated talking about the housing market and I wanted to do something else. My plan was to launch a new YouTube channel and make it all about helping veterans, and one of my first videos was about the Wings over Dallas air show mid-air collision. That video ended up going semi-viral, and it made me realize how much I love talking about aviation safety, so I shifted gears and Pilot Debrief was born, and I started making aviation content from that point on. It took several months to figure out how I could blend my passion for aviation safety with what the audience wanted to watch, but when it clicked, the channel really started to grow. And as the channel grew, I set milestones to achieve, and I thought I'd be happy once I got there, but then I'd achieve those goals and would just set even bigger goals. It turned into this cycle of always trying to make each video better than the last, and it was a ton of work. The bigger my channel grew, the more work I wanted to put into each video, feeling like I'd be letting everyone down if I had a bad video. I was happy about how the channel was growing, but something was missing. It was depressing talking about tragedy week after week after week. After 2 years of making aviation mishap videos, I was getting burned out and I needed a break. It was taking me 25 to 30 hours a week to research mishaps, find the right one that had a story to tell, put together the details, film the video, and edit it. This was all on top of my job at the airlines and trying to raise 3 kids and balance family life and vacations too. But enough about that. When it comes to learning how to fly a Cessna, other than the stalls, this next part was probably the most important part of my training.
Alright, so if our engine were to fail right now, what are we going to do?
First thing we're going to do is
for
pitch for best glide,
Whiskey,
70 knots.
final, full
So
count, 2, 3
basically
minutes.
just going to take the time now with 90 knots as the airspeed bleeds off to start troubleshooting. As I get down to 70 knots, lower the nose to hold that 70 knots. Then we're going to check the carb heats on. And then you said Florida door, so we'll start making fuel selectors in both. Make sure the mixture is full rich, carb heats on. Make sure everything else is turned on.
Yep.
And then at the same time, we're kind of looking outside. There's plenty of places to land around here. We got a quartering headwind right now. So I got time to kind of circle back around in this field right here.
Under traffic, Cherokee 65 Juliet, 3 mile final,
Basically set myself
123.
up to land, going this direction. Looking below, make sure there's no power lines or anything else that's going to be an obstacle I'm going to have to worry about at the last minute there. And then in the meantime, I can go ahead and start making my mayday call.
Before I explain what happened next, this flight was finally coming to an end and we were headed back to the airfield. There was only one thing left for me to do before my solo flight, and it was something in the back of my mind from the beginning of this video, and I knew it was something that Michael couldn't help me with. If I'm going to rent a plane, I need insurance, and thankfully Marcy and Megan at Avemco have been amazing, and they helped me get set up with what I needed, and they've been big supporters of my channel since day one, so I can't thank them enough. Now, in full transparency, I have 2 confessions to make. First of all, when I was about halfway done editing this video, my wife found one of my old photo albums and this photo that I thought had gotten lost. This is from my first solo in a Cessna 172, and I'm so glad that I still have it. Second, if you remember in the beginning, I said this was going to be way harder than I expected. Well, the truth is that I scheduled my solo flight for mid-April and bad weather forced me to cancel the trip. We rescheduled it for 2 weeks later, but then I got an email saying that the aircraft was going to be down for its annual inspection and no longer available to fly. I really felt like I'd failed my mission, but that made me remember that the whole reason I started this journey was to rediscover my love for aviation, something that started one day when I thought I would be an astronaut and took me down an unexpected road to where I am today. That's why I decided to rent the same Cessna that I had been training in and take it for a solo flight, and now I'm going to share that flight with you along with the end to my story and one big final surprise at the end. Alright, I just completed the walk around. We're ready to go. I'm about to do something I haven't done in 25 years, fly a Cessna 172 solo. And I gotta admit, I'm still a little bit nervous about it, even though I have all this experience, right? Anytime you're flying an aircraft for the very first time, especially by yourself, it's something new, and so that's why we have a checklist, and that's why we have procedures to back ourselves up and to stay safe. For the starting procedures, we made sure the seat track is the seat's locked in position there. Avionics are off, the autopilot is off, carb heat is off, mixture is set to full rich, throttle is set to slight. I've already primed the engine, brakes are set, clear prop. Now blaster on.
Okay, let's lean out the mixture a little bit here while we're on the ground. Pull the RPMs back to about 1100. All right, finish up the checklist here.
All right, back to my story. My Pilot Debrief YouTube channel was doing really good, but I was getting burned out and I needed to make a change. My original plan was to just do some flying on the side and hopefully take my family for a flight one day, and that's when the idea for Hoover's Hangar was born, and I made the decision to launch this new YouTube channel. The only problem was Hoover doesn't have a hangar or an airplane, but more on that in a minute.
Monroe traffic, Scott 2746 Lima, taxiing Hangar 9 to runway 23. It's such a weird feeling flying solo, and I know it might be odd for some of you to hear me say that, but essentially for my entire career in the Air Force, and then afterwards with the airlines, I've never really flown single pilot. I think I did a ferry flight one time in the Strike Eagle from Warner Robins, Georgia, up to Seymour Johnson. I did that by myself. So that was, I think, the only time I flew the Strike Eagle solo.
Downwind, runway 23.
And other than that, the last time I flew single pilot was essentially in a Cessna 25 years ago out at the Air Force Academy. So it's something new. It's a warm day today. Weather's looking great. Everything looking good for the flight today. So this should be a lot of fun. I'm super excited about it. It's something I've been looking forward to for a long time. I've spent essentially the last 2 months preparing for this, you know. Okay, we've got an aircraft parked in our run-up area.
Traffic, King Air 613 is down and clear, 23 Monroe.
Where we would normally run up, so we'll do the run-up down here at the end of the runway here.
As I taxied out to the runway, I was excited about the flight, but also excited about Hoover's Hangar. First, when I told my wife I wanted to launch a second YouTube channel, she initially thought I was crazy, but then she fully supported the idea, just like she has with all of my crazy ideas, and I wouldn't be where I am today if it wasn't for her. However, the truth is that it's a lot less work to make content for this new channel, especially now that I have a full-time editor to help with all of the videos. The best part, though, is both YouTube channels allow me to share my passion for aviation safety and do what I love. When it comes to Pilot Debrief, I promise you that channel is not going away, but I hope that you'll give me some grace if I scale back just a little bit every now and then, so that way I can have some more time with my family and not find myself working 60 hours a week. But enough about that. Here's my first time taking off solo in a Cessna 172 in 25 years.
And he is clear. Monroe traffic, Scott 2746 Lima, taking the active runway 23 for departure to the southeast, Monroe.
Monroe traffic, the helicopter now short final for the departure end of Alpha, remaining west of 23 Monroe.
We got the helicopter in sight, it won't be a factor. There's our 2300 airspeeds alive. Got a little bit of a left crosswind. There we go. There's our traffic warning. I see the traffic out there. Helicopter off the right side. He's landing over there. Stay clear of the runway. Not a factor. Well, I'll tell you one thing, this aircraft climbs a lot faster when you don't have a second person sitting in it, that's for sure.
When it comes to Hoover's Hangar, this isn't going to be a come fly with me channel. It's much more than that. My goal is to fly as many different kinds of aircraft as possible and share with you everything you need to know to be safe. This channel is all about the love of aviation and connecting with other pilots and sharing their stories and the aircraft that they're most passionate about. This is also my chance to make new content about something that I love, even if it only inspires a small number of people.
Maybe it's just me, but whenever you're flying solo, I don't know if you've ever had this feeling before or first time flying solo in an aircraft, all of a sudden you start paying attention to a lot more things in the aircraft that you maybe didn't notice before, and you start to notice little things and you're like, hey, was that always the way it was? I can't remember. You know, just because I think your senses are heightened a little bit and you're a little bit nervous about things. But, you know, honestly, this is like flying any other plane. I mean, albeit I'm going a lot slower than what I'm used to. But it's a lot of fun to get out here and do this.
Up to traffic, Skyhawk 30 Echo, turning downwind, runway 23.
I got to be honest, this was probably one of the most challenging videos that I've ever made, just because of the amount of work that it went into it. You know, the number of flights that I had to do with the weather delays and things like that. I got to admit that it's a little bit disappointing I didn't have the opportunity to go out to Colorado to the Air Force Academy to fly the same Cessna that I did my very first solo in 25 years ago. But just having the chance to get out here today to fly this aircraft, or really any aircraft solo, is an incredible opportunity. And none of it would have been possible without Avemco. They've been a huge supporter of mine for a long time now, and obviously before I go rent an aircraft like this, or you know, before I buy an aircraft, which I hope to do someday, you know, you need to have insurance, and Avemco has been great at taking care of me and all of my needs for that. Super awesome people to work with, just very friendly, very understanding, and they know the business like none other. So being able to get that squared away with them allowed me to, number one, rent this aircraft, but also help support me in this new channel. If you have aircraft insurance and you want a new quote, I would go check out Avemco, or if you're thinking about getting an aircraft, buying one, or renting an aircraft, I would definitely recommend giving Avemco a call and finding out what they can do for you. Can't recommend them enough.
One of the things about flying out of Monroe is that there really isn't a lot to look at unless you fly towards Charlotte and into the Class Bravo airspace, which I didn't want to do. So I spent about 20 minutes flying around the countryside, and then my plan was to come back and knock out a few patterns, but you're about to see how something unexpected was going to change the plan.
Okay, we can go direct.
Constant traffic, 500.
We can click on nearest airports. We can click on Monroe Executive.
Monroe traffic, 2600 Lima, clear runway 23 at Alpha 5, Monroe.
Terminal and activate. You can see it all the way out there. You can see the water tower that we use for entry. You know, this is definitely something that I didn't have when I did my first solo 25 years ago. I mean, I don't even need to use an iPad because it has everything in here that I need to navigate wherever we need to go. But visual references are key, and maintaining visual awareness, not only of where you're going, but you know, I can look outside right now and I can pick out probably about 6 different fields that if I had an emergency of some kind, you know, engine failure, I've got a place to set the aircraft down. So, you know, I wore this shirt today as a reminder to aviate, navigate, communicate, and that's the most important thing. Something happens with the aircraft today, no matter what it is, the number one thing you need to do is keep flying the plane. Like, you can't give up on flying the aircraft. And then figure out what you're going to do for your plan, where you're going to turn the aircraft, know where your nearest place to set it down is, know what the threats are, kind of leapfrog in here as we go back towards Monroe. And, you know, and then communicate, declare that emergency, and let people know what's going on. Monroe traffic, Skyhawk 2746 Lima, 10 miles to the southeast, inbound for runway 23, Monroe.
Monroe traffic, helicopter 407, Pop Delta, right cross on 23, Monroe.
We got one guy taking off, we got a helicopter in the pattern. I think that's probably the biggest threat about this airfield here, is the volume of traffic for Monroe Executive. You got, you know, the flight school there, you've got some helicopter operations, but you got a ton of people that use that airfield as well, instead of flying into Charlotte there. And there's no control tower, so everybody's kind of doing their own thing. And, you know, even though the flight school has some standard entry points for the pattern and things like that, not everybody uses those. So you really have to keep your eyes out for other aircraft.
Overhead runway 23, approach Anfa, right spiral down. Runway 23, touch and go, Orangeburg.
Monroe traffic, Skyhawk 2746 Lima over the water tower, entering the downwind for runway 23, traffic in front of me in sight, Monroe.
All right, my plan was to do a touch and go and then one to a full stop because of how busy the pattern was, but I'm all about safety and the importance of a debrief. So when something unexpected happened in the pattern, I knew that I needed to share it with you and the lessons that we can learn from it. So I'm going to show you my touch and go and full stop in a minute, but first, it was between those two landings when things started to go wrong.
Air traffic 2866 Lima taking off, runway 23 departing to the east. Monroe.
Power pull back, get the carb heat out.
All right, you just heard a Cessna saying that he was going to be taking off from runway 23. And the problem right now, if you remember from the beginning of the video, is that there was an aircraft parked in the run-up area. So pilots are having to do their run-up near the hold short for the runway, and that means there's a line of airplanes waiting to take off. The next in line is a Dassault Falcon 900, which is a business jet, and he's been waiting for a while, and listen to what he does.
Monroe traffic, Skyhawk 2746 Lima, left base runway 23, Monroe. Alright, we got the business jet taking the runway.
Monroe traffic, X5 Kilo Bravo, line up, runway 23.
There's his radio call saying he was going to line up and wait runway 23.
Really, dude?
I'm going to go ahead and make my turn to final here and see how all of this plays out, but I'm already knowing in the back of my mind that I'm probably going to have to go around.
Monroe traffic, Skyhawk 2746 Lima, final runway 23, Monroe. And I'm just going to go around. And Monroe traffic, Skyhawk 2746 Lima is going to go around runway 23. We'll stay to the east, Monroe. Alright, we'll go ahead and get the flaps cleaned up.
Monroe traffic, 85 Kilo Bravo,
500.
runway 23.
Stressed traffic 316 Central Pop, turning right crosswind runway 17. Air traffic 2866 Lima departing the pattern to the east. We'll final call Monroe.
I mean, that dude heard me in the pattern. He heard me calling base, and then he decided to pull on the runway, even though he's taking off behind a Cessna. He's a business jet. You know, like he's got to have enough room. You know, like a Cessna's going to have a slow departure out of there. But that's why we make the decision to go around early rather than trying to force a bad situation. You know.
Could be the east departure for 39 Whiskey.
And it was interesting, you know, I was trying to decide what to do because I didn't want to overfly the runway because then I'm going to lose sight of him, right? And I know he's going to take off in front of me, but like if he delays that takeoff, he could potentially climb up into me and neither of us see each other. So I need to offset one way or the other. I didn't want to offset to the left because it's into the direction of the pattern, and now, you know, I've got to contend with traffic on the downwind. But also, if I offset to the right, I was cognizant of the fact that we had the helicopter doing some operations earlier, but I hadn't heard them in a while, so I was pretty comfortable, you know, thinking that they were out of the way, but I was definitely looking outside. And I did, Monroe traffic, Skyhawk 2746 Lima, cross 1 to runway 23, Monroe. This is what I was talking about earlier. Remember on the inbound, I said that was the biggest threat, and sure enough it was. You know, you got too many aircraft in the pattern here. You know, tower's not controlling things. Otherwise, tower probably would have sequenced things a little bit different for all of that. You know, so, but that's okay.
When it comes to the rest of the debrief, this is Hoover's Hangar, and one of my goals is to find out what kind of plane to get for me and my family, so I hope you join me on this channel as part of that journey as I fly new aircraft every episode and we can learn all about them together. For right now, here's my first Cessna 172 solo landing in 25 years, and be sure to stick around to the end for the big surprise.
Monroe traffic, Falcon 85 Kilo Bravo, India, field taxi on 23.
Monroe traffic 739 Lima Whiskey, taxiing to run up 23 from Hangar 1, Monroe.
Monroe traffic, Skyhawk 2746 Lima, base runway 23, Monroe. Okay.
Monroe traffic, 5385.
1, 2, 3, get the rest of our flaps.
Juliet, turning left, crosswind, for 23 Monroe.
Keep the nose coming down. Get that power back a little bit more. Finals clear. Monroe traffic, Skyhawk 2746 Lima, turn final runway 23, touch and go, Monroe.
500. 500.
5385 Juliet, turning left. Downwind for 23 minute.
For traffic, helicopter 407, Pop Delta, departing runway Alpha back to the north. Should be
Little
going back for
fast.
23 minute
Let's
round.
get that airspeed back. Just keep tracking down. Alright, that guy's turning clear of the runway at Alpha 4 down there. He is clear. Not a factor. There we go. Back on the path that I want. Still about 5 knots fast.
Our track Series 3, Bravo Victor, clear at runway 23, Alpha 3, back to runway 23.
So, get all the pressure of everybody in the hold short, watching you land. Alright, let's start pulling the power back. Laps up, 1.
Our traffic, helicopter 407, Pop Delta, clear and airspace to the north-northwest, last call, Monroe.
Ooh, that felt good. Monroe traffic, Skyhawk 2746 Lima, on the go, left close, Monroe.
Center traffic, 535 Juliet, turning left 833 minute.
Alright, we'll make this one a full stop. Ah! Oh, I was happy about that. It's, you know, it's all that pressure, you know, landing solo for the first time, and you got, you know, a couple of aircraft sitting there in the hold short watching you. You know, it definitely could have been a little bit smoother. I could have held off, pulled a little bit more, held off a little bit longer in the flare there, and let it settle down a little bit nicer. But you know what? I'm pretty happy with how that turned out.
Now it's time for my full stop, and then we can call the mission complete. On Pilot Debrief, I talk about how sometimes all the holes in the Swiss cheese line up, leading to an aviation mishap. And looking back on my aviation journey, I can't help but realize that all the holes needed to line up perfectly for me to be where I am today. And if I could go back and do it all over, I wouldn't change a thing.
Ah, shit. A little too much. Well, that happens.
I'm so excited for this new channel, and I hope you join me. And who knows, maybe I can still be an astronaut one day.
Alright, ready to go?
3, 2, 1, blast off!
And we are airborne.
Whee!
Alright, you want to come on the controls? Huh?
Yeah, how do I fly?
Well, hold on, don't push the button now.
Which way is our house?
It's going to be up this way somewhere. We're going to go see if we can find it here.